37,000 veterans are sleeping outside in America tonight. This is the story of one of them, a 26-year-old woman who solved heat, water, power, and air inside a forgotten storage facility for $210 and built something no one expected, like this. Subscribe. Stay with her. There is a particular kind of silence that settles into a person who has spent years listening to the hum of machinery inside a steel hull and then one day has to come back and live in a world where the silence is supposed to feel like peace. Most people never experience that silence. Most people sleep in their own beds, in their own homes, without ever thinking about who made that possible. This is a story about one of the people who made it possible, and what happened to her after the country she served forgot to ask how she was doing. Her name is Kayla Reed. She is 26 years old. And the most important thing you need to understand about Kayla Reed is that she has never once, in her entire life, accepted a brochure that someone else chose for her. When Kayla was 17 years old, she walked into the Navy recruiting office on Camp Bowie Boulevard in Fort Worth, Texas, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, still wearing her Reagan High School track jacket, still smelling faintly of the gymnasium she had just left. The recruiter was a thick-necked petty officer, first class, who looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before sliding a brochure across the desk without making eye contact. The brochure was for administrative logistics. It had a photograph of a woman in uniform, sitting at a desk, smiling at a computer screen. Kayla looked at the brochure. She looked at the recruiter. She said, very calmly, the way a person says something, they have already decided, long before arriving at the conversation, I want electronics technician. Combat systems. The recruiter leaned back in his chair and said, ET is a tough rate. Not everybody's built for it. Kayla picked up the brochure, set it back on his side of the desk with both hands flat on the surface, and said, I'll be back on my 18th birthday to sign the paperwork. Thank you for your time. She walked out. She did not look back. She came back exactly as promised, on the morning of her 18th birthday, in February of the following year, and she signed her name to the United States Navy with the same calm certainty of a person who has already run the numbers and knows exactly what the answer is. 3 years later, that same recruiter would use Kayla's name as an example in his recruitment presentations. He never told her that. She found out from someone else, the way you always find out about the things people say about you when they think you can't hear them. She was already deployed by then, 6,000 miles away, elbow deep in a radar system on a guided missile cruiser in the Persian Gulf, making sure that the Combat Information Center of the USS Resolute never went dark. Not once. Not for a single second. 310 sailors went home to their families because the systems worked. The systems worked because Kayla Reed, 18 years old, then 19, then 20, then 21, then 22, then 23, kept them working. That is what service means. You keep the ship running so everyone else gets to go home. What happens after that? What happens when the ship comes back to port and the uniform comes off and the country you kept safe for 5 years suddenly cannot figure out what to do with you? That is a different story entirely. That is the story we are here to tell. She was honorably discharged in the summer of 2022, 23 years old, with a duffel bag, a DD-214 that nobody in the civilian job market knew how to read, and a GI Bill she had never used because nobody in the Navy's Transition Assistance Program had explained the enrollment deadlines with the same precision they used to explain weapons handling protocols. She came home to Fort Worth on a Thursday. By Saturday, she had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town with her old high school friend Jeff, who was finishing her junior year at TCU and who talked about her marketing internship the way Kayla used to talk about the Strait of Hormuz, as though it were the most consequential thing currently happening on the planet. Kayla did not resent Jeff for this. She understood it perfectly. The world you are standing in always feels like the most important world there is, and Jess had been standing in a very different world for the past 5 years. What Kayla had not anticipated was the quiet, not the external quiet. Fort Worth was loud enough, the traffic and the construction and the constant ambient noise of a city that never fully stopped. It was the internal quiet that caught her off guard. On the Resolute, every system hummed. The ship was never completely silent. Even at 3 in the morning, when the crew was at minimum watch, you could feel the engines through the soles of your boots. You could hear the ventilation cycling. You always knew the ship was alive because the ship never stopped telling you. She applied for a position as an HVAC technician at Meridian Facilities Group 3 weeks after coming home. She was the only applicant who showed up 15 minutes early, with her certification documents organized in a manila folder in order of relevance, and the only applicant who, when asked to describe her diagnostic process, used the phrase systematic elimination of variables without being prompted. She was also the only applicant who had to explain what a DD-214 was to the hiring manager. They gave her the job, not because they believed in her. She could tell the difference between being hired because someone believes in you and being hired because nobody else wants the overnight weekend shift. She took it anyway. It was a foothold. Kayla Reed understood footholds. She had been finding them since she was 17 years old, standing in front of a desk where someone tried to hand her someone else's future. She took the overnight weekend shift at Meridian Facilities Group, and she was better at the job in 3 months than most of the men who had been doing it for 3 years. She did not say this out loud. The building system said it for her every morning when she walked out, and everything was still running exactly as it should. By the time Kayla had been at Meridian for a year, she had quietly become the person the other technicians called when a diagnosis didn't make sense. Not because anyone assigned her that role, because the role exists wherever there is someone who knows how to think through a system instead of just reacting to it. And in every room Kayla had ever been in, that person had eventually been her. She was 24 years old, and she was the youngest person in the field crew by at least 8 years. And she was also the person who found the cascade fault in the HVAC system at St. Andrew's Medical Center on a Saturday night in January, when 3 senior technicians had already spent 4 hours looking in the wrong place. She noted it, filed it, and moved on to the next problem, the way the Navy had trained her to do. The Navy does not celebrate competence. The Navy expects it. What the Navy does not prepare you for is the particular social arithmetic of being young and female and right in a room full of older men who are wrong. Kayla navigated this the same way she navigated every other system she had ever encountered. She learned the variables. She understood the pressure points. And she found the path that produced the correct output without creating unnecessary friction. She started working with Ryan Cho 6 months after. He arrived at Meridian as a 22-year-old fresh out of a kinesiology-adjacent engineering program that had pivoted to facilities management somewhere in the curriculum. Ryan was the kind of smart that had never been tested by anything that couldn't be fixed with a Google search. And Kayla recognized this immediately because she had once been a version of that person before the Navy took that version of her apart and rebuilt her into something considerably more durable. She taught Ryan the way a good chief petty officer teaches a new seaman, not by doing the work for him, but by asking him the right questions in the right order until he arrived at the answer himself and understood why it was the answer, not just that it was. She taught him to read building schematics the way she had been taught to read ship schematics, which is to say, as a living document rather than a fixed map. Systems change. Buildings breathe. You have to read what the system is telling you today, not what the blueprint says it should be telling you. Ryan was a quick study. Within 4 months, he was the second best diagnostic technician on the crew. Kayla told him this directly, which was the highest compliment she knew how to give, because on a ship, you do not waste words on things you do not mean. The email came on a Monday morning in the spring of 2024. It was from the regional HR office of Core Access National Services, and it used the word integration 11 times in 4 paragraphs, which Kayla had learned was corporate language for a particular kind of arithmetic in which some numbers are moved and other numbers are removed entirely. She read the email twice, the same way she read an unusual sensor reading, once to gather data, once to interpret it. Then she went back to the condenser unit she had been working on and finished the calibration, because the unit needed to be finished and the email was not going anywhere. Core Access had acquired Meridian in a transaction that the Fort Worth Business Press described as a strategic consolidation of regional service capacity. What it meant in practice, Janya said, a national corporation with a standardized vendor network and a preference for contractors over full-time staff had just purchased a local company whose greatest asset was the institutional knowledge of 9 people who would not appear on any balance sheet. Within 60 days, The entire Fort Worth crew was terminated. The official reason given was operational restructuring. Ryan Cho received a different email. His email offered him a position as junior team lead under the new Core Access regional management structure, which was a promotion, technically, though it came with a pay cut disguised as a reclassification. He signed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. without reading the attached roster. He found out on Monday morning that Kayla's name had been on the other list. He did not call her. He did not know what to say, which is a different thing from not caring, though in the moment it can feel exactly the same. Kayla submitted her first job application on the same day she received her termination notice. She submitted 53 more over the following 5 months. She received 5 responses, 3 of which were automated rejections. She received 3 interview invitations. She received 0 job offers. The interviewer saw a 25-year-old woman without a 4-year degree and without what they called corporate environment experience. They did not see the Combat Information Center of the USS Resolute. They did not see 5 years of keeping a warship operational in one of the most contested waterways on Earth. They saw a gap where a diploma should have been, and they moved on to the next resume. The GI Bill processing office told her it would take 4 months to activate her education benefits. When she asked what she was supposed to live on during those 4 months, the woman on the phone apologized and said that was outside the scope of their department. Kayla thanked her, hung up, and sat very still for about 45 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and submitted application number 54. The savings ran out in the 5th month. This is not a dramatic statement. It is an arithmetic statement. Kayla had saved money carefully during her 2 years at Meridian. She had grown up in a household where money was always approximately $30 away from a crisis, and the Navy had reinforced the habit of treating every resource as finite and therefore precious. But 2 years of a field technician's salary, minus rent, minus food, minus the cost of being a functional adult in a city that does not offer discounts for people who are trying, does not produce the kind of savings that can sustain a person through 5 months of unemployment. It produces a number, and the number ran out. Jess was generous. Jess offered to cover the rent for a month, and then another month, and the offer was real and the kindness behind it was genuine, and that was exactly why Kayla said no. She had seen what happened to people who accepted a safety net without a plan attached to it. She had seen it on the Resolute, among the sailors who got comfortable with being taken care of, who stopped learning the systems because someone else would always manage them. She had watched those sailors struggle the most when things went wrong, and they suddenly had to think for themselves. She picked up her duffel bag, the same duffel bag she had carried off the Resolute 2 years earlier, the same one she had carried out of every difficult situation in her adult life, because it was the right size for exactly what she needed and nothing more. And she hugged Jess at the door of the apartment, and she walked out into a Thursday morning in Fort Worth, Texas, with $600 in cash, a DD 214 that nobody wanted to read, and a brain full of knowledge about how systems work that nobody had figured out how to assign a market value to yet. The $600 was something she discovered almost by accident, folded into a small envelope in the inner pocket of the duffel, a year-end bonus from Meridian that she had set aside and then forgotten about entirely. She sat in her car in a parking lot on East Lancaster Avenue and counted it, $600. She thought about the motel on the access road that rented rooms by the week, 3 weeks of shelter, approximately, before the money was gone, and the situation was identical, except that she would be 3 weeks further from solving it. She put the envelope back in the duffel. She drove to the Planet Fitness on Rosedale Street, paid $25 for a month's membership, and used the first month's access to take the longest shower she had taken in years. Then, she drove to the Ridgemont Plaza and parked in the far corner of the lot, where the security cameras had a blind spot, and she made a plan. The Ford Escape's transmission failed on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 blocks from a school she had once watched children pour out of in the afternoon sun, small and loud, and entirely unaware of the man in the parking lot across the street who had fixed the building's heating system and could now not afford to fix his car. Kayla's version of this was quieter, but no less specific in its irony. She had serviced the HVAC system of a medical office building 2 blocks from this parking lot just 8 months ago. The building's air handlers were still running on the maintenance schedule she had written. She was sleeping in the parking lot of a shopping center. She sold the Escape to a salvage yard on Hemphill Street for $350, which was fair given the transmission and the age and the rust along the rear wheel wells. She carried the duffel 2 miles to a spot beneath the I-820 overpass on the south side, where a small encampment of tents had been established by people who, like her, had not planned to be there and were managing the situation as practically as they could. She set up her own tent at the edge of the encampment, close enough to the concrete support pillar to block the wind from the north, far enough from the others to maintain a perimeter she could monitor. Every morning at 5:30, she walked to the Planet Fitness on Bryant Irvin Road, showered, dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, and walked to the Fort Worth Central Library, where she used the public computers to apply for jobs and check her email and sit in the warmth without anyone asking her to leave. It was at the library that Gloria Chen first noticed her. Gloria was 55, a reference librarian who had worked in that building for 22 years and who had developed, over those 2 decades, an extremely precise ability to read the difference between a person who was using the library and a person who was surviving in it. She did not say anything to Kayla for 2 weeks. She watched. And then, one afternoon, she set a small, white envelope on the table next to Kayla's elbow without breaking stride and kept walking. Inside was a handwritten note. Tuesday and Thursday, 7 p.m., Room B, Veteran Resume Workshop. Free. No registration. Kayla held the note for a long moment. It was the first time in 4 months that anyone had interacted with her as though she were a person with a future rather than a problem with a present. She folded the note and put it in the front pocket of her duffel, next to the DD 214. The worst night under the bridge came 3 weeks later, when a man she had never seen before stopped outside her tent after dark and stood there longer than a person stops when they are simply passing through. She unzipped the tent and stood up. She was wearing her old Navy-issue thermal layer and her work boots, and she looked at the man the way she had learned to look at a system that was displaying anomalous behavior without alarm, without aggression, with complete and total attention. She said, in a voice so level it contained no invitation for escalation, "I don't have anything worth taking, and I know exactly who I'm talking to." The man left. She sat back down in the tent and stayed very still for a while, and she realized that this was the first time in her adult life she had felt afraid in a way that 5 years of Navy training had not prepared her for. Not afraid of the man, afraid of how invisible she had become, afraid that the country she had served did not know she was sitting in the dark under a concrete overpass in Fort Worth, Texas, and would not have known what to do about it if it did. She found it on a Sunday morning in March 2025, which was 4 months after the transmission gave out, and approximately 10 months after Core Access had determined that her salary was a line item that needed to come down. She was walking the frontage road along Eagle Creek, looking for a gas station with a public restroom when she passed the chain link fence with a faded sign bolted to the gate. Lone Star Storage, climate-controlled units, 24-hour access. Below the sign, someone had zip-tied a smaller placard that read, "Closed." The asphalt in the lot was cracked and colonized by weeds in the expansion joints. The landscaping along the fence line had grown past the point of suggesting intention and into the territory of suggesting abandonment. The facility had been closed for 3 years. The owner, a man named Walter Harlan, had died in 2022 without direct heirs. His only surviving relative, a niece in her 40s, he had not spoken to in 15 years, and his estate was moving through probate with the particular unhurried pace of legal processes that have no deadline and no one urgently waiting on the other side. The chain on the main gate was new and solid. The chain on the side entrance, the one facing the drainage ditch along Eagle Creek, was original hardware from 1985 and had spent 37 Texas summers oxidizing into a state of purely ceremonial function. Kayla pushed it and it opened. She walked the rows. 4 buildings, more than 80 units, every door down, every door locked with a hasp that had been secured when the facility closed and had not been touched since. Climate-controlled units on the interior rows, insulated walls, sealed concrete floors, drop ceilings with acoustic tile. She stopped in front of Unit D7 and looked at it for a long time. The hasp on D7 was a standard padlock, master brand, the kind with a laminated steel body that resists cutting, but yields in about 40 seconds to a torsion wrench and a pick, which Kayla had learned to use at age 20 aboard the Resolute, from a chief petty officer who believed that a good technician should be able to get into anything the ship needed her to get into. She was inside D7 inches under a minute. She stood in the doorway and looked at the insulated walls and the sealed floor and the fluorescent light fixture with its working bulb, and she understood, with the immediate clarity of someone who has spent years reading the functional language of enclosed spaces, exactly what she was looking at. She was not looking at a storage unit. She was looking at a compartment. And compartments can be made livable if you understand the systems. Kayla Reed understood the systems. She had understood them since she was 20 years old, and her chief petty officer had told her, any space is a good space, if the systems are right. Heat, water, power, air. Solve those 4 problems and you can live anywhere on Earth. She had solved them in the Persian Gulf. She was about to solve them in Fort Worth. At the far end of the Building D corridor, she found something else. A mural, faded to the point of translucence, painted directly on the concrete block, an American flag, rendered in careful brushwork, signed in the lower right corner, W. Harlan, 1987. She stood in front of it for a while. Then she walked back to D7, sat down on the sealed concrete floor, and began making a list. She came back that night with her duffel and her tool roll, and she did not leave for the better part of a year. The total investment required to transform Unit D7 from an empty, insulated box into a functional living space was $210, which she paid out of the $600 in the envelope from the inner pocket of the duffel, which she had been carrying for 4 months without spending, because she had been waiting for a problem that spending it could actually solve. The thermal envelope was already built. Climate-controlled storage facilities are, by design, better insulated than most American apartments. The walls of D7 had 2 inches of rigid foam behind the metal panel facing. The floor was sealed concrete. The ceiling was insulated above the drop tile. She did not have to insulate anything. She had to add heat, water, power, and invisibility. Heat was a 2-kilowatt diesel air heater she found at a Northern Tool on Camp Bowie Boulevard for $150. She vented the exhaust through a 4-inch hole she drilled through the exterior wall at the back of the unit, the wall that faced the Eagle Creek drainage ditch, and nothing else. She sealed the hole with a rubber grommet and high-temperature silicone and mounted a carbon monoxide detector directly above her sleeping position and tested it every morning. The unit held 68 degrees on nights when the outside temperature dropped to 19. $4 of diesel per week. Water was a problem that solved itself when she found the main shutoff valve in the utility closet at the end of Building C and turned it. Water filled the pipe for the first time in 3 years. She ran a garden hose from the maintenance sink through the drop ceiling of the corridor and down through a hole in the wall of D7, connecting to a small stainless steel basin she mounted on a plywood countertop she built from materials salvaged from 3 units down the row. A 12-volt RV water pump, powered by the battery bank, pressurized the line. She turned the faucet handle for the first time on a Wednesday evening in late March, and water came out. Clean water. Warm from the pipe within 30 seconds. She sat down on the floor next to the basin and held her hands under the water and did not move for a long time. She had not had running water in her own space for 5 months. She had not understood, before that moment, how much of a person's sense of themselves is contained in the ability to turn on a faucet. Power was a $40 used battery from a pawn shop on Jacksboro Highway, connected to a second-hand solar panel. $12 at the same pawn shop that she positioned behind the parapet wall on the roof where it was invisible from street level. The rubber grommet, the high-temperature silicone, and the carbon monoxide detector came to $8 at a hardware store on Camp Bowie, bringing the total to $210. LED strip lights, a phone charger, the pump, a small fan for circulation, no electric bill for as long as she was there. Invisibility was the oldest skill she had, older than the Navy, older than the recruiter's office on Camp Bowie. She entered and exited exclusively through the breach in the Eagle Creek fence, only between 10 at night and 4 in the morning. She kept the exterior of D7 identical to every other closed unit in the facility. The rolling door down, a padlock she had installed on the outside so the unit appeared secure to any passing observer. No light visible from any external angle after dark because the drop ceiling tiles absorbed the LED strips completely. 2 weeks after she moved in, she found the dog. Or, the dog found her. A gray-coated male of uncertain breed, thin but not frightened, who appeared at the fence breach on a Tuesday night and sat down and waited. She gave him half a granola bar. He did not leave. She named him Radar, because his ears tracked sounds from 200 yards away, with a precision that would have been impressive in a sensor array costing several $1,000s. And because the name suited a system that worked perfectly and asked for nothing in return except to be fed, the first knock came on a cold night in November, from the corridor outside D7. Kayla turned off everything. She sat in the dark on the mattress she had built on a raised pallet platform and listened. The footsteps stopped. A woman's voice came through the steel door, quiet and deliberate. "I know someone is in here. I can smell the diesel." "I'm not going to call anyone. My name is Donna. I was Air Force. PJ. I've been outside for 5 days." Kayla had met pararescue jumpers exactly twice in her Navy career, and both times they had struck her as people who existed at a frequency slightly beyond what most human beings are built to sustain. She opened the door. Donna Reyes was 28 years old, standing in the corridor in a field jacket with a torn liner, her right arm held at a slightly unnatural angle that Kayla recognized as someone managing chronic pain through posture adjustment. She had been injured on a search and rescue operation in her 4th year of service, a rotor wash incident that had done things to her shoulder that 2 surgeries had not fully undone. The Air Force had given her a medical discharge and a VA rating and a referral to a pain management specialist whose next available appointment was 4 months away. She had been outside since the money for her last room rental ran out. Kayla brought her inside, wrapped her in the spare wool blanket, and made instant coffee on the butane stove. They did not speak for a while. They just sat in the heat of the diesel heater and listened to it hum, the way both of them had once listened to machinery hum in places most Americans cannot locate on a map without assistance. Donna did not bring much with her. What she brought was a trauma kit, the real kind, military grade, with a tourniquet and hemostatic gauze and a chest seal and an airway adjunct, the kind of kit a pararescue jumper carries, because they go into situations where the standard medical timeline does not apply. She also brought the knowledge of how to use everything in it, which turned out to be the most valuable thing anyone would bring to Building D in the months that followed. Tyler Nash came in December. He was 17 years old, wearing a school backpack and a jacket that was not warm enough for the temperature, and he had climbed the Eagle Creek fence at 11:15 on a Wednesday night because he had nowhere else to go. And the storage facility was dark, and dark meant safe when you were 17, and leaving was the only option that felt survivable. He was not a veteran. He was a child. Kayla did not hesitate. She brought him inside and gave him food, and let him sleep on the floor of D7 with Radar, who appointed himself Tyler's personal guardian within approximately 20 minutes, and did not budge from the boy's side until morning. What Kayla gave Tyler over the following months was not charity. It was education, which is a different thing, and in many ways a more difficult gift, because it asks something of the recipient. She taught him to read building schematics. She taught him to trace a circuit. She taught him the logic of diagnostic elimination, how to look at a system that is not working and determine, step by step, which variable is responsible. And she told him something she had been told by no one, something she had arrived at herself through 5 years of Navy service, and the months she had spent sleeping in places that people drive past without looking. You can lose everything they can take, the apartment, the job, the car, the address, all of it can go. But what you know, what is actually inside your head and your hands, that is yours permanently. Nobody can repossess knowledge. Learn the systems. Learn how things actually work. That's the only currency that functions in every economy, including this one. 8 months later, with Gloria Chen's address at Fort Worth Central Library serving as his official mailing address, Tyler Nash was accepted into the HVAC technology program at Tarrant County College on a skills-based scholarship. The day he left, he shook Kayla's hand at the fence breach, and she held it for a moment longer than a handshake usually lasts. And then she let go and watched him walk toward the bus stop on Eagle Creek Road, and Radar sat beside her and watched too. James Okafor had been a journalist for 16 years, the last 4 of which he had spent embedded with Navy units in the Pacific as part of a long-form defense reporting project that had won him 2 regional awards, and permanently altered the way he read a person in uniform. When Gloria Chen mentioned, carefully and without specifics, that she knew of a situation in Fort Worth that might be worth a journalist's attention, James drove from Dallas on a Saturday morning and parked on the frontage road along Eagle Creek and stood at the chain-link fence and said, loudly enough to be heard, but without projection, "My name is James Okafor. I was with the 7th Fleet in 2019 and 2020. I'm not here to cause harm. I'm here because someone told me there was a story that deserved to be told correctly, and I would like to try." Radar heard him before any of them did. Kayla stood at the corridor window and watched him for 4 minutes without moving. Then she went back to D7 and sat on her pallet for 3 days before she made a decision. She met him at the fence on the 4th day. She had 3 conditions: no real names, no address, no photographs of faces, and the story had to say 37,000, not as a statistic, but as a count of individual people, each of whom had raised their right hand and sworn an oath and come home to find that the country they had served had not maintained the systems that were supposed to catch them. James agreed to all 3. The piece ran 6 weeks later. Ryan Cho read it on his phone during a lunch break at the Core Access Regional Office in Arlington and recognized the detail about a female technician who had trained 2 people in systematic diagnostic methodology because he had been one of those 2 people, and because he had been thinking about Kayla Reed every time he signed a work order in a building that she might have once maintained. He sat in his car for an hour before he went back to the library and asked Gloria for help finding her. When he finally sat across from Kayla in the quiet of Room B, he did not open with an apology, because he understood intuitively that an apology offered to Kayla Reed as a first move would be received as a currency she had no use for. He said, "I want to know what I can do." That was the right sentence. Over the following 6 months, Ryan built a veteran hiring framework within Core Access's Fort Worth operations that required DD 214 service records to be evaluated by trained HR staff against civilian equivalency charts, and that classified Navy electronics technician certifications as equivalent to a relevant 4-year degree for the purposes of field technician hiring. It did not undo what had been done. It changed what would be done next. Claire Harlan was 44 years old, Walter's niece, and had not been to Fort Worth in 15 years when the probate attorney called to say the Lone Star storage property needed to be physically assessed before the estate could be closed. She flew in on a Wednesday, rented a car, and drove to Eagle Creek Road, expecting to see a vacant lot with a chain-link fence. She walked the exterior of Building D first, out of order, and when she came around to the side facing the drainage ditch, she found Radar sitting at the fence breach, watching her with the calm assurance of a system performing its designated function. She stood there for a long time. Kayla came out. Claire said nothing for a while. Kayla showed her D12, led her down the corridor to the unit she had found locked on the first night, and relocked with a padlock she had bought with $6 from a hardware store on Jacksboro Highway, and opened it with her own key and stepped aside so that Claire Harlan could see her uncle's things arranged exactly as they had been, covered with the same tarpaulin, undisturbed, as though someone had understood that certain things are not yours to touch even when no one is watching. Claire stood in the doorway of D12 for a long time. Then she turned around and looked at Kayla and said, "Who are you?" Kayla told her. Claire sold the Lone Star storage property to Veterans Home Forward, but a Fort Worth nonprofit transitional housing organization, for $1 with 2 conditions written into the deed. Building D would be rehabilitated as legal transitional housing, and Kayla Reed would be offered the position of Systems Operations Director for the project. The job offer came on a Thursday morning. Kayla sat with it for exactly 1 day. She accepted on Friday. The morning she moved out of D7, she took the American flag down from the wall, the one she had carried in the duffel since the day she walked off the Resolute at 23 years old, folded into a square the size of a paperback, the one she had unfolded and taped flat against the wall of this unit, because it deserved to be seen rather than stored. She laid it on the pallet beside her DD 214 and looked at them both for a while. Then she picked up the DD 214 and turned it over. The back was blank. She took a black marker from her tool roll and wrote 4 names: Donna, Tyler, Radar, and below them, smaller, Gloria, Ryan, Claire, James. Pret. The front of the DD 214 was a record of what the country had given her at 18. The back was the record of what she had done with it when the country forgot it had given it to her. She folded the flag in the proper Navy fashion, triangle, clean folds, no corners exposed, and set it in the duffel next to the DD, 214. She picked up the duffel. Radar walked out of D7 ahead of her, down the corridor, through the breach in the Eagle Creek fence, and into the morning. Kayla was 26 years old. The knowledge the Navy had put in her hands at 18 had not expired. The country that gave it to her had simply forgotten to ask what she could do with it. The systems, as always, told the truth. They always do, if you know how to read them. If this story changed how you see the storage facilities you drive past on the highway, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me which part hit you hardest, and tell me where in the world you are watching this from tonight.
Kayla reserved her country at 18. She kept a warship alive in the Persian Gulf, so 300 sailors could go home. Then she came home and slept under a bridge. Not because she was broken, because the system forgot her. But here one nobody could reposit her mind with $210 and the glorious bill into her hand. She greased it with the bower and sailed inside an abandoned storage unit. She took in a weather Air Force veteran, a homeland dinner, and a child named Radha. She rebuilt life the same way she rebuilt Mache, systematically, patently. We were just waiting for permission. This is a lesson that matters most. Your education is the only currency that works in every economy. Degree can be ignored, job can be enemies, car breakdown, saving disappear. But what lies inside your mind and your hand that belong to you forever. Kayla didn't wait to be rescued. She reached the system around her and built something from nothing. Every one of us carries that same potential. The question isn't whether the world will give you a flying star. The question is, what you build when it doesn't. Learn your system. Learn how things actually work. Kayla